much for the. So my name is Jeanne-Rachel Leroux, and I teach French at CSI. I've been here about 5 years now. But 12 years ago, I went to Japan to teach French and English, and I did so through the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, shortened as the JET program. So I'm first going to talk about my experience applying for the program, my experience while I was in Japan. This will take about half an hour, and then I'll be available for questions if you guys have any. Okay, so why did I wish to apply to the JET program? Well, I did a Japanese Bachelor of Arts, so I studied Japanese language at a university in France. And I had also started my master's degree in Sangad language acquisition. So I was training to become a teacher of French as a foreign language. Just as you have ESL instructors, English as a second language, you also have French as a foreign language instructor. And so that's what I was training to become. I wanted to discover Japan. I had lived there for about 3 months. I had done an internship at a university in Japan to teach French. But I definitely wanted more experience and more time to discover the country and the culture. And I wanted to improve my Japanese language skills after studying it at university. I was very much still an intermediate level speaker. So I was not advanced by any means. I was not fluent. And I wanted the opportunity to immerse myself in the country where the language was spoken and improve my language skills that way. And also gain work experience. Was a college student. I was not wealthy. I could not just up and move to Japan without any means to do so. So the JET program allowed me to sort of pay my way through that experience and get a job. So already pretty much have a job before even arriving in Japan. I have a job lined up and then accommodations and things like that, and gain teaching experience. So the JET program, like I said, it's Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. It's present in many, many countries in the world. It's present in the US. They recruit young college graduates to go work in Japan, usually for one of two positions. So there's the ALT position, which is the Assistant Language Teacher. And then there's the CIR position, which is Coordinator for International Relations. So they're a little bit different. There's also a third role. It has to do with professional athletes, and it's a little niche. So I'm not really going to talk about that, but most JET program participants become ALTs or CIRs. I applied to be an ALT, so I applied to teach my language in Japan. So when I applied, it was pretty much a standard application. I went online and found for you guys the first page of the 2022 application. Was pretty much the same. It's like a 9-10 page long document that you have to fill out with like general type questions, but also your education, your degree, your language proficiency. So it is in English and Japanese, which does imply that as a French person, I also needed to be proficient in English. The application is not in French. And then you also have to provide medical forms as part of the application. So I applied. The deadline was in January 2010. And so I sent in my documents. And so then, just to let you know, in France, the JET program is very small. There's not a lot of jobs in Japan to teach French. So there's only about 4 to 6 positions every year to be filled for the entire country. So there's a long list of qualifications, and this is entirely in French, but to give you an idea of everything that you need to be or have done in order to apply, including speaking Japanese, at least as an intermediate proficiency. The program does exist in the US, and it is a lot more flexible. There's a lot more openings for jobs to teach English in Japan, And it's also, they don't require the participants to actually speak Japanese when they arrive. So it's a little bit of a different experience. There's about 4 jobs in France every year. There's more than 1,000 jobs in the US every year through JET. So very different perspectives. So I applied, I sent in my documents, and I was selected for the second round of application, which was the interview at the embassy. So that happened in February 19, 2010. So I did a deep dive in my emails to like find those dates again. This was not the first time I interviewed for JET. I applied 3 times. I applied 3 different years, and I got in the 3rd time. The first time I didn't pass round 1. The second time I went to the interview and then was not offered the job. And then the 3rd time I got the interview and was offered the job. So I think this helped a lot in the sense that that interview experience was helpful, even though I failed the year before. When I went in the 3rd year, I felt a lot more confident. And the Japanese culture knows how to be intimidating. So it's an interview at the Japanese embassy with 5 to 6 Japanese officials that are sitting down in front of you, and you're all alone in the middle. And then part of the interview is in French, part of the interview is in English, and part of the interview is in Japanese to assess your language proficiency. And then 2 months later, just about 6 weeks later, so on April 6th, I got a notification that I was waitlisted. So I didn't get the job. I was crushed because this was my lifelong dream. I called the lady at the Japanese embassy in Paris. I still remember her name. She was very nice. Her name was Endo Mariko, so Mariko Endo. And I talked to her, and she told me unofficially that I was #1 on the wait list. So basically, I was so close to getting it, still not happening. But then 1 week later, I got another email from Mariko Endo that said, unofficially, we have a job for you. There's an opening. And then the same day, 2 hours later, I got an official notification that I was offered a job. Sort of the behind the scenes of that is that I was actually replacing someone who had wanted originally to stay and renew their contract, but became pregnant and wanted to go back to France, and so let go of her position. And so that's how I was able to get it. And then in May 18, I got the official sort of like job letter from the Kanagawa prefecture of Japan. So that's where I was going to be teaching. So I'll show you on the map where that is and everything. So that was a little bit of a very chaotic application process, lots of drama. Okay, so these are the emails I got. Again, it's in French, but the emails for the interview are the embassy, so the official time of your interview and things, and then the official job letter for Kanagawa-ken, which is the Kanagawa prefecture, which was the organization that hired me as an assistant language teacher. There was an information session and cocktail hour in July 2010, which was about 1 month before we flew to Japan. We arrived in August. And it was in the Japanese Cultural House in Paris, which is sort of like, does a lot of Japanese cultural events, works a lot with the Japanese embassy. It was very intimidating because the Japanese ambassador was there, Japanese ambassador in France was there. And it was stressed to us that the Japanese business attire was very different from the French business attire. So a lot less flexible. So you had to be dressed really nicely. And then you also had to make a speech because Japanese people are big on speeches. And so that was definitely a stressful time. And I was a poor college student. I did not own business attire. So it was a whole thing to get ready to do. And that's also when I did my visa paperwork. to get my visa to be able to work in Japan. This picture is the current, actually, cohort of JET in France, and there are 5 JET participants. So there's a couple more people. There's some officials from the embassy on this picture. There's also the director of the JET Alumni Association, but there's 5 JET participants in 2022. So in the meantime, between, I would say, May and August, I got my everyday life information from the current ALT that I was replacing. Her name was Lucy, and she had decided to go back to France. She was expecting her first baby at the time. I was able to see the apartment I was going to move in, which was the one she was living in. I was able to buy her furniture secondhand, so that I arrived in a furnished apartment and exchanged questions about cost of living, how much the rent cost, and also the job information. What were the schools where I was going to be teaching, and all that. So that was very, very helpful to have all that information before I went to Japan. And this was my apartment. So this was my building here. This was my little street, which kind of a side street off of a main, a bigger road. And this was the entrance to my building here. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, so it was here. It was a newish building. It was built in 2007, so it was up to the norms of earthquake and the seismic, norms in Japan. Because when I arrived, it was only 3 years later, so it was a very recent building and deemed very safe, which was good because I was in Japan during the Fukushima nuclear catastrophe and the tsunami that caused it. So there was a big earthquake when I was living in Yokohama. So I was supposed to go teach in 3 public high schools in Yokohama. So Yokohama is very close to Tokyo. I think it's like what Jersey is to New York a little bit. It's still very much city. It's the same big metropolis. Yokohama is half an hour by subway from the south of Tokyo. So it's in the middle of the very urban area that surrounds Tokyo. And my 3 high schools were Yokohama Kokusai, Zamasogo, and then Hodogaya. Not going to go into detail about this, but just really quickly, high schools in Japan are competitive. So you need to pass an entrance exam to enter high school, including public high schools. The more prestigious a high school is, the more difficult it is to get in. So out of those 3 high schools, the Yokohama Kokusai, which was an international high school, was definitely the most, I would say, prestigious, the most difficult to get into. Students were able to study several foreign languages. They had a lot of school trips abroad and partnerships with other schools across the world. Zamasogo and Hodogaya were very much more normal high schools, less difficult to get into. Hodogaya, I think, used to be a boys' school, so it was still about 70% boys by the time I taught there, even though it had become co-ed. Very different atmosphere, very different levels of discipline as well. I wouldn't say they were rough per se, but they were definitely a lot rougher than Yokohama Kokusai. So very different environments, those 3 schools. So my responsibilities were, so I was to teach in 3 high schools. So Monday and Thursday, I was at Zamasogo. Tuesday, I was at Hodogaya. And then Wednesday and Friday, I was at Yokohama Kokusai. To give you an idea, my main school was Yokohama Kokusai. So I lived about 15-minute walk from there. But Zamasogo was an hour and 45 minutes away by public transportation. And then Hodogaya was 2 hours away by public transportation. So much, much farther, much longer commute. And so that made for, I think, a very hectic week sometimes to be in one school and then another school the next and then another school the next, and then long commutes. So I learned to sleep on the train like the Japanese people do. because some days I had a 4-hour commute, all in all. And that did play a role into my decision not to stay in Japan longer than 2 years. I think by the end of the 2 years, I felt wrung out by that rhythm, that work week rhythm. I was team teaching with Japanese language teachers, and I was teaching French and English. I would say 90% French, but I picked up a couple of English classes because of the fact that French is not a very common foreign language in Japan. English is. Everybody studies English. So most of my classes were French classes, but I also taught a little bit of English. And I had to participate in school life. So any way that I could disseminate the French culture to my students. So sometimes we had like international days at school. We also, there was an exchange with a French high school in Yokohama Kokusai. So I sort of helped organize that. And so all those little things were part of my job responsibilities. This was my office at Yokohama Kokusai. In Japan, the teacher's room is one big room and everybody has a desk. And if you're not in class, you're supposed to be at your desk in the teacher's room for the workday. Even if you're not teaching in the afternoon, you're still supposed to stay there and put in your work hours. It's the norm. So it's kind of office hours, like I think it was 8 to 5 or 8:30 to 4:30 or something like that, if I remember correctly. So this is me with some of my students. You can see all the French posters in the back. That's another class and part of the class. I have a lot of pictures where I do the victory sign for my 2 years in Japan. This was with a colleague that I was team teaching with at Hodogaya. This was my last class where they gave me a gift and made me cry. And then this was the speech that I made my last week, my last day of work in Yokohama Kokusai. Again, Japanese people are very big on speeches. So I had to get up in front of the entire, teacher population of the school. They gave me a microphone and I had to make a speech in Japanese for 10 minutes. So it was quite excruciating at that time. And this was a goodbye party with my YIS is Yokohama International School. It's Yokohama Kokusai High School, my main high school. So when I was working in Japan, I worked a lot, but I also very much discovered the country. So I took every opportunity that I had to travel. We didn't have a lot of time off, but the few, the weekends and the few days off that we had, I tried to discover as much as I could. So this is Yokohama, where I used to live. This is the city center of Yokohama. It's called Minato Mirai, which is the neighborhood of the future. It's kind of futuristic, has a Ferris wheel. There's like buildings that have like interesting shapes and stuff. This is at night. It's very pretty at night with all the lights. This is the same view during the day from like one of the skyscrapers. And you can see Yokohama is a port town. It's originally the port of Tokyo. So it's still a very active port today. So it's right on the water. I lived in a neighborhood called Gomyoji, which was about, I would say, 20 minutes away from this neighborhood by train. The train takes you everywhere in Japan. So you don't, I could drive, but I never really rented a car because they drive on the left side of the road. I was a young driver. That seemed very scary to me. And then there was no need. You could hop on the train. It would take you anywhere. You had to be careful because if you fell asleep on the train and you missed your stop, you could find yourself in a completely different region of Japan. So I went to Kyoto, which is the capital of the west side of the main island, kind of Tokyo's opposite. Kyoto is very historic, very traditional. Kyoto is very historic, traditional, lots of monuments, and Tokyo is very modern. So this is the Kinkakuji, which is the Golden Temple. I think this is the Ginkakuji, which is the silver temple, but I could be wrong. But it's another temple that I saw in Kyoto. I went to Kyoto several times. Every time someone came to visit, we went to Kyoto. This is another famous temple in Kyoto as well. I saw Mount Fuji multiple times. It was an hour away from where I lived, so by train. So I saw it from every single possible side. I have, I think, hundreds of pictures of Mount Fuji. So it behind clouds during the winter, during the spring, during the summer, from the lake, from the city. I'd never hiked it, but I saw it a bunch. Again, it was a typical site of Japan that every time I had friends come visit, we would go see Mount Fuji. Kamakura is an old capital of Japan. It's again not very far from Yokohama. It's about, I would say, 45 minutes away by train. This is the flowering of the hydrangeas, which has those flower. So just as you would go see the cherry blossoms in Japan, you would also go see other flowers blossom at different times of the year. So in June, the ajisai blossom. So the hydrangeas blossom, and there are some gardens and temples that have, you know, gardens famous for their hydrangea blooms. So you would go with friends and walk around and view the flowers and then get a drink, pretty much. So this is in Kamakura. This is the same temple. Another temple, but same for the ajisai, so the hydrangeas in June. This is the Izu Peninsula. I really like this picture because that's an onsen. So it's a Japanese bath, traditional bath. And this one was kind of out of the way in the country. So it's very small, but you looked at right over the sea. And we were alone with my friends when we used it. So it was very, very nice. You enter Japanese baths, Japanese onsen, not with a swimsuit. You go in naked. You cannot be closed. Oftentimes, it is crowded. There are other people there, and everybody's naked together, which is very strange for French people, extremely strange for Americans as well. But the water has medicinal properties. So sometimes it has like a black color or green color because of the nutrients that are inside. It's volcanic soil, so the water is heated naturally. And it's really a profound cultural experience. I always loved doing it, and I used to go to the onsen very, very often. Now they are separate. There's a women's bath and a men's bath. But that's a fairly recent change from the last century or so, because they used to be mixed. Men and women used to bathe together. It changed during the American occupation of Japan after World War II, because it was too much for Americans to see men and women bathing naked together. Their poor little hearts couldn't take it, so they had them built separate facilities for men and for women. But if you go to the country in Japan, some out of the way places, you'll still find onsen that aren't mixed. And even those that have separate facilities, oftentimes it's a curtain that people chat with each other above it, or it's a very flimsy separation. This is in Nikko, which is a tourist destination, sort of north of Tokyo. So this is in Nikko as well. There's a very famous temple that you can visit in Nikko, and there's a lot of hiking that you can do too around it. My most faraway trip was Okinawa, which is a string of islands between the southern point of Kyushu and Taiwan. This is the castle in the main city of Okinawa. But Okinawa is very well known for its white sand beaches. It's sort of heaven-like little islands. Very interesting twist also on Japanese culture. It's quite different from the main islands of Japan. I went during Golden Week with a friend. Golden Week is the equivalent to spring break. So you have 1 week off in April. And so that's when I went to Okinawa with a friend. I also went to Kanazawa, which is a city, this time on the west coast of Japan. Tokyo is on the east. Kanazawa has a lot of historic districts and little like historic streets. It also has a famous castle that you can visit. So I did a lot in Japan when I was there. I didn't travel very far. I didn't do everything. It was not my purpose, but I wanted to discover the region where I was living. And so I did a lot of little day trips and things like that. I would say that the impact of my Japan exchange and teaching experience, was multiple-fold. First, I did improve my Japanese for sure. I lived there for 2 years. I think it gave me a grasp of everyday Japanese that I still have today. I lost a lot of it because in the meantime, I moved to a different country and I did not really practice it. It's still there in my brain somewhere, but I did very much improve my language skills. I also gained a lot of friends that I still have today. Most of my, I would say, JET participants' friends have since moved away from Japan, but I have one friend who still teaches there. But I also made friends, Japanese friends that I still keep in touch today. I went back and visited a couple of times. I try to do that every few years. So definitely long-lasting relationships. And I think the last consequence impact was the work experience. I think thanks to that experience in Japan, I was able to find a teaching job in France when I went back to finish my master's degree. So I was hired by a language school that had partnerships with different universities and business schools in Paris to offer French language classes to their foreign students. And I was hired on the huge misconception that I had experience with Asian learners, except that school, 80% of their students were Chinese. Just because I lived for 2 years in Japan, I got hired when China and Japan are two different countries, two very different cultures, and two very different languages. But that misconception, I think, allowed me to get that job, that allowed me to pay off my second year of grad school, because I finished my master's degree in Paris. And then it also allowed me, I was offered another job in Japan when I earned my master's. And I was offered a full-time teaching job in Japan. So I think that was very much in part thanks to this JET experience. I was also offered a teaching job in the US. And so I had to choose between the two when I earned my degree. And the fact that I had the teaching experience at that time, I had 3 years of teaching experience all in all. And I had also been able to live in a country vastly different from mine, operate in a language that was not my own. I think that definitely made my applications stand out for jobs. And I chose to come teach in the US where I still am today. So I came over to the US in 2013. So almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. I think becoming a language teaching assistant is great. Not only for people that want to become teachers. Mostly it allows you to experience a country and to pay your way through that experience, meaning that not everybody can just up and go, spend 1 year backpacking through Europe or whatever. I could not do that. I needed to find a job. And there are a lot of programs that allow you to have that job lined up. They pretty much just expect you to be, you do need citizenship of the country that you apply from, and then you need to be a native speaker. But you can go to Japan with JET. You can go to France with TAPIF, which is also a public program funded by the French government. You can go to Spain through the Language and Cultural Assistant Program. I have friends who did that. You can also apply to Fulbright, that sends young college graduates all over the world as teaching assistants. We actually have at CSI, we have a Fulbright foreign language teaching assistant from France, Professor Anaïs Moussouni. And so she is doing her 1 year as a teaching assistant at CSI. I cannot speak highly enough. I know people from all those programs that are alumni of those programs that did not necessarily become teachers. I would say half of them did, half of them did not, and have completely unrelated jobs, but were able to spend 2 years in Madrid as, you know, a 20-something-year-old, or a year in France after graduating from college. And so I think that's a priceless experience. You're not, you know, it's not a huge salary that you get, but it's enough to live on, and it's enough to enjoy it and enjoy your experience there. Perfect. I am half an hour in, which is what I wanted. So I wanted to leave some time for a Q&A from the attendees. So if you have any questions about my experience as French teaching assistant in Japan or anything like that, please feel free. I think we have about 15 minutes.
Wow, thank you very much. Okay, someone has a question. Yeah. Please speak up.
So I just want to ask, what level of Japanese did you know before applying to the JET program? And I guess how significant do you think it is for their acceptance rate? So
for France, it was very important to have at least intermediate. So if that can give you an idea, it meant that I was able to sort of like know my way, like in a store, and like, you know, do some very simple tasks, such as going grocery shopping, or having a short conversation about the weather, or talking about what I was going to do tomorrow. So that intermediate, but that's for French applicants, because it's I would say the criteria are more stringent. All of the American JET program participants that I met when I was there, most knew no Japanese at the beginning. Some phrases sometimes, but most learned as like when they were there. Basically, JET does not expect, if you apply from the US, they don't expect you to necessarily know Japanese, although that might be a plus if you've taken a class or two. But they expect you to be willing to learn and experience the culture when you're in Japan. And there's nothing like immersion. You know, if you need to eat, you figure out quickly enough how the supermarket works, and you know, and how to pay for things and things like that. I think my American friends, I had a great time. You know, they didn't speak as much Japanese as I did at the beginning, but they were able to get by. Is there another question? That was a great question, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Do you guys have any other questions? If not, I have a question about food. So how can you adjust about food? A lot of sushi. Are you comfortable having sushi?
Actually, you know, I think Japanese food is like a lot more diverse than what we see abroad. So there is, you know, there are the sushi bar restaurants and things like that, but there's also a lot of meat, a lot of different types of fish and cooked differently. They also have amazing bakeries, by the way. They do amazing cakes and pies and things like that. The food is always very good. Like, I mean, you know, sometimes you'll have to be open to new experiences, like eating the head of a fish.
Oh.
In one of my classes, I taught English to primary school students. So I had little like 7-year-olds and 6-year-olds in like around me. We used to go to the primary school and do like activities in English with them. And we used to eat with the kids at school. And so you eat in the classroom, they sort of come out with all the pots and pans, and then they serve you, and then you eat with the kids in the classroom. And in Japan, it's very common that you finish your plate. And so I was told more than once by a 6-year-old in Japanese, like, finish your plate, dude, because you're like, we're ashamed of you sitting at our table right now. So yeah, but I mean, food was amazing. I mean, they have soba, they have, you know, the noodles, have so, you know, it's so good. It's such a great like cuisine. Everywhere I went, I did not put any picture of food, but I had many. Everywhere I went, I took pictures of what I was eating.
Thank you.
Oh, several questions. Great. Maybe Ashley first.
I wanted to ask if there were any like teaching techniques that
I think you cut out. I heard technique, but I did not understand what kind of technique.
I'm sorry. Are you able to hear me a bit better?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I was going to ask if there were any teaching techniques that you were able to learn in Japan that you have used now.
Yeah. I think that it was definitely my longest teaching experience. I had taught before, but only for 3 months. It was also my first experience in high school. So I think I I expended a lot of energy making lesson plans and designing activities and lots of games. I was also doing my master's degree thesis on teaching French through theater. So I was also able to do like some theater improv like activities in my language classes, which was great. I think that because I was team teaching with a Japanese teacher, I think that the pedagogy was very old-fashioned in general, but I was given the freedom during my little time of the class or half the class to sort of lead a lot more original activities. And most of the Japanese teachers I worked with were very, I think, excited by that. And the fact that I came from France and I came with new strategies and techniques. And then I was excited about actually doing it in the classroom rather than just reading about it in the textbook. It's exhausting though. But I think teaching assistants are great because they're young and they have energy. And so when I planned the lesson plan, you know, when I was 23 or 24, it's certainly different from what I would plan today. I think the more seasoned you get as a language instructor, the more tools you have and the more tools, like the more you hone your tools, which is great. But you also maybe sometimes lose like that little bit of energy and spontaneity that you have a lot of when you're very young. And so, yeah, I mean, I learned a lot of different techniques that, I mean, I still sometimes use today, for sure. Andrew, you had a question?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I was wondering you had mentioned that you had to stay afterwards if you weren't like teaching in the afternoons till about 4 o'clock, I believe you mentioned. When you're there and as a teaching assistant, can you go a bit more in depth about what responsibilities you had to maintain as a teacher's assistant? Because I'm not exactly sure what that might be.
Well, I mean, that's when I did all my course prep. I could do my grading. I could design exams, like oral exams and things like that. When I was in the teacher's room and not in class. That's also when we would do meetings with the Japanese teachers to also plan classes, plan lesson plans. And I mean, culturally, it's well known that Japanese people are workaholics and they spend their life at work, and there's a huge social pressure to do that. However, that doesn't mean that they're super efficient when they're at work. So you had teachers that would get there very early and leave very late. However, they would also sleep on their desks for 3 hours every day. So, you know, it's a very different environment from France, where the point is to do your work as efficiently as you can so that you can leave and then have your life. So it's a very different, like, different standard, I would say. But yeah, when I was at my desk, I mean, you know, planning a class when you're teaching for the first time takes about twice as long or 3 times as long as the class lasts. So if you have a 1 hour class, it takes 3 hours to prep, depending on what you want to do. So, you know, that's where the days went. You know, honestly, they were pretty full.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? If there's not question, and I put the clue form on the chat group in case you need a CC clue for this presentation. And also I like to say, at the Office Center for Global Engagement, we have a study abroad program. We send students to study in Japan. It's one of the programs. So you're welcome to stop by our office in Building 2A, room 206, or send us an email. Any questions, and look at our website.
I think there's one question in the chat that I can still answer. We have about 5 more minutes.
Yes, yes. Oh, they just, yes, please.
I did not get to pick, Justin. And it was actually in my official job letter that it's take this or leave it. Like, I mean, you know, and the thing is that it was a very, I would say, it was a job placement that a lot of people envied because I was in the city. Oftentimes, JET program places its participants deep in the country. So it's I mean, you know, it's also a great experience, but you cannot enjoy city life as much as I did. I mean, every weekend I was in Tokyo, you know, I went to Shinjuku and Shibuya and the clubs and the karaoke bars and stuff. I did not show you these pictures, but so I didn't get to choose, but it was a very, like, considered a very nice placement anyway. And apart from, I think, the hectic work schedule, I think it was pretty perfect for my purpose in Japan. I could have renewed a 3rd year. The reason I did not is mostly because of the 3 schools. It was too much. I had such long days, 3 days a week, and it was exhausting because it was also 3 different speeds, 3 different atmosphere. Some classes were rough for a young woman at the time. There's this mistaken idea that Japan is big on discipline. It is not. So it was kind of, but you know, I think I learned a lot about also navigating a classroom during that time, but 2 years was long enough. And so I decided not to stay for a 3rd year. Maybe one more question before we're done. Last chance. Yes, Ashley.
Yes, I was going to ask, like, looking back at your experience, what qualities or mindset do you think it's important for someone that wants to go into this exchange program?
I mean, I think that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but it's really open-mindedness. But usually people who apply are people that want to get that abroad experience, right? And so they thirst for that. I want to live in a place that's different from what I know. I want to interact with people who don't look like me, don't speak the same language I do, don't view the world in the same way. And so I think that's the most, like, interesting part of the experience. But definitely the most important quality is to be tolerant. You learn a lot. I mean, I lived Yokohama, you know, it's the city, but in my neighborhood, I was pretty much the only white woman. So that also taught me a lot about, I would say, you know, society and how I was treated too, because I looked different. And And that allowed me to also extrapolate that in future experiences when I went back to France and now that I'm in the US. But yes, open-mindedness, tolerance, I think. I mean, you'll have experiences that just would sound plain weird. Japan is the only place I've lived where young girls used to stop me on the street to gush about the size of my nose. So, I got used to that very quickly. The first time that happened, that was very weird because I feel I have a big nose and I don't like it. But in Japan, it was the height of grace and elegance to have a big nose. So yeah. Lester, one last question.
Yeah, hi. So one of the questions I have for Japan, when you go there, what are the do's and what are the don'ts?
You cannot sneeze. No, not sneeze. Blow your nose. Sorry, my English failed me. You cannot blow your nose in public. It's not done. So don't do that on the train. Japan, you don't. I come from a Latin culture. We kiss to say hello. That's a big no-no in Japan. You bow to say hello. So you don't touch people as much as you would do in France, for instance, or I think in the US. Yeah, there's lots of gendered attitudes in Japan as well. So things that you do as a woman that you can do, and things that only men do. That being said, and there's a good and bad side to it, and I'm sad that this is the end because this would necessitate a lot of more in-depth analysis. But Japanese people are extremely welcoming, but Japanese society can be extremely closed off. So if you're there and you don't look like you're Japanese, you will pretty much never be treated like you're Japanese. And so you're kind of treated to another set of standards. In some ways, that gives you more freedom to do things that Japanese people feel that they could not do. But in another sense, that also hinders your assimilation into the culture. Because I've known people that lived 20, 30 years in Japan and were still considered gaijin, foreigners. And let's not even go into the Korean community in Japan, where generations after immigrating to Japan and generations having been born in Japan are still not considered Japanese. So, again, I think that would necessitate a lot more in-depth conversation. But yeah, there's lots of do's and don'ts, but in every culture there is. So yeah. Do I like Japan better than USA? Yes and no. I love some sides of Japan. I dislike some others. I love some sides of the US and I dislike some others. There's no perfect place. Everywhere you go, you bring yourself anyway. So the same problems follow you. But
and sorry, keep going. Keep going, sorry.
No, I think it's time. I mean, unless you want to add something. I don't
Yeah, because I wonder if you guys know, we have a Japanese Visual Culture Club, a student-run club at CSI, and then I'm the staff advisor, and we are very, very active. And Justin, who was our president, he's also very, very active. Right here, yes. So we had meeting on Tuesday, 2:30 in 2M116. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, it's still 2M116.
Yes, every Tuesday and 2:30. So welcome to say hi to us. We watch movies, we have origami, we have a lot of activity. If people interested about knowing about the culture, or just hang out with us.
That's so nice.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for attending. I had no idea that this many people would be interested.
It's very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to stay here for a few minutes in case you have a few questions, but I'm going to stop recording. And again, thank you very much, Professor Leroux.
Yes, and let me add, if anybody has any type of follow-up questions about if you're thinking about applying to JET or another, similar program, I'm available to chat and discuss. I've also written many recommendation letters for former students of mine. So I've sent former students of mine to France as English assistants. And so definitely definitely available. Feel free to email me, and you can find me in 2S Building Word Languages, Professor Leroux. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Mhm.